hearing of the Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health will come to order. Agenda: Sudan, a review of the administration's new policy and a situation update. First of all, let me begin by welcoming our first panelist, but before we get into the hearing on Sudan, I would like to regretfully report that this morning an estimated 20 people were killed in Mogadishu in Somalia, including 3 ministers. 2 of the ministers I knew very well. I visited Mogadishu 7 months ago and met with these ministers, the Minister of Education, Minister of Health, and we had previous meetings in Nairobi. It was a graduation of the medical school in Mogadishu where this tragedy occurred. And so we would like to express our condolences to the victims and their family members, the transitional federal government of Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed, and the people of Somalia. Secondly, I just got off the phone with the president of Puntland. Puntland, as you know, is one of the 3 regions of Somalia: Puntland, Somaliland, and Somalia. And we just reached an agreement this morning on prisoners who were being detained by the government of Puntland. These were people from the Ogaden, and they were being held without cause. And so we have been working with the president of Puntland to try to get their release. And this morning the president will announce that he will commute their sentences and he will release them. And so I'd like to thank the president of Puntland and Amnesty International, who's been working with it, and Jim Hill, their representative, and the Ogaden community here in this area. Let me then move to our hearing this morning. Sudan, a review of the administration's new policy and a situation update. Let me also express my deep appreciation to the witnesses who are certainly among the most knowledgeable people on Sudan. Over the years, we have held so many hearings and briefings on Sudan, and people here are tremendously interested in trying to bring attention to the suffering of innocent civilians and in the hope of promoting a just peace for all. Many believe and hope that the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement or the Darfur Peace Agreement would bring about the much desired peace and stability in Sudan. Unfortunately, and despite multiple efforts, millions of Sudanese continue to suffer. I sometimes wonder if we will ever get a just peace in Sudan as long as the al-Bashir regime is in power. For those who still believe that a peace agreement with this regime will bring an ending to the suffering, I say, look again at the situation in Darfur and in Abyei. Some of us saw firsthand the aftermath of the burning of Abyei by government and pro-government militia in May 2008, when more than 50,000 people were displaced from their homes. As a senator, President Obama stated, "For years, the government of Sudan has thwarted the will of the United States and the international community and offended the standards of our common humanity. Before we improve our relations with the government of Sudan, conditions must improve for the Sudanese people. We cannot stand down. We must continue to stand up for peace and human rights." I fully agree with then Senator Obama, now our president. It was not long ago that we witnessed another horrific genocide in Africa. The international community, including the United States, turned a blind eye to the gruesome genocide in Rwanda in 1994. In Rwanda, an estimated 1 million people died in less than 100 days. In Darfur, 6 years since the genocide began, the people of Darfur are still waiting for the suffering to end. A few years ago, I stated, if Rwanda was a black mark on our conscience, Darfur is a cancer that will destroy the moral fiber of our society. This is still the case. I'm not opposed to a policy of engagement. In fact, I always argue we should give peaceful dialogue a chance before we declare war. For some, our policy is too focused on punitive measures. I beg to differ. The United States has been at the forefront when it comes to engagement. We never disengage. The United States has appointed more special envoys to Sudan than it has to any other country in Africa. Why? In order to secure a just peace, we have imposed punitive measures against this regime, but we have always helped the Sudanese people. In October 2009, last month, the Obama administration announced a new policy towards Sudan. The policy focuses on 3 priorities: an end to the conflict in Darfur, implementation of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the CPA, and ensuring Sudan does not become a safe haven for international terrorist groups. The new policy clarifies a number of issues that surfaced in recent months and reaffirms the conflict in Darfur, that it is genocide, stating that the United States' primary objective in Darfur is a definite end to conflict, gross human rights abuses, and genocide in Darfur. The new Sudan policy also states that cooperation on counterterrorism without verified progress on other issues will not lead to a normalization of relations. The administration also plans to enhance U.S. assistance to South Sudan and to help prepare that country for a possible 2-state outcome should the people choose independence in 2011 referendum. I fully support the policy objectives of the new policy. The question remains, what if the regime continues to obstruct these efforts? What are we doing to promote justice and accountability? The United States government supports a transparent, free and fair election in Sudan. Can those elections be free and fair while 3 million people are still in displaced and refugee camps? By supporting the elections with Bashir as a candidate, are we saying no to justice and accountability? It is my hope that through the course of today's hearing, we will gain greater insight into these critical issues. Let me once again thank our distinguished witnesses, and before I introduce them, let me turn to our senator who has graced us. As you know, Senator Brownback has been a leading witness and fighter on the questions of Sudan. And in lieu of the ranking member, I'll certainly turn the mic over. We're pleased to have you with us, Mr. Senator.
Thank you very much, Chairman Payne. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I know this is highly unusual. I am honored. I'm pleased. I would note to the crowd, and a number of people already know this, but when we declared genocide when it was taking place in Darfur, it was Congressman Payne, you were the one that led that effort and that charge. And a number of people were saying, well, do we really want to do this? Is this really the time? Is this really the place? And you fought and said, yes, it is. Let's not do it after it happens. Let's try to stop it while it's happening. And you leaned in aggressively, and we did that for the first time in, I believe, the history of this country. And it was important. And that's what draws my attention to be here today. In the ashes of World War II, the international community adopted the Geneva Convention and the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It's designed, among other reasons, to protect against and deter future mass atrocities. Now, since its adoption, these conventions have served as the basis for targeting and bringing to justice several notorious war criminals and perpetrators of mass atrocities. The United States has participated in several cases. We helped to bring to justice the former Serbian leader Karadzic, the so-called butcher of Bosnia, accused of slaughtering hundreds of thousands of innocent people, even put a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture, and he currently resides in prison at The Hague. Charles Taylor, the warlord turned leader of Liberia, assumed power in the 1990s on an election slogan of "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." Taylor was directly involved in coordinating and supporting unthinkable atrocities over many years. The Congress passed legislation offering a $2 million reward for Taylor's capture. He was caught having fled to Nigeria and now sits in a prison at The Hague alongside some of the world's worst offenders of human rights. The United States was involved in that one as well. Yet despite American interest and involvement in these and other cases, there is only one instance in the history of the United States when our government acknowledged and declared a genocide at the time it was taking place, and it was one I just alluded to. That place is Sudan, and the genocide declared in 2004 continues under our watch today. Under the reign of President Bashir, the Khartoum government has committed 2 genocides. Sudan has become a haven for al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, while the regime provides support for Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army, the most horrific terrorist group in Central Africa today. Added to that, in March, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Bashir on 5 counts of crimes against humanity and 2 counts of war crimes. His government responded by expelling more than a dozen humanitarian groups from Darfur, seizing their assets and threatening life-saving operations in Darfur. Based on our nation's leadership in the past, one might think that such a unique and tragic designation in Sudan would have triggered a massive effort not only to bring an end to the genocide, but also to bring justice to the perpetrators. And indeed, at one point, the tragedy of Sudan's genocide did stir this country. I recall, as many of the people in the audience will, mass rallies to save Darfur, headlined by Hollywood celebrities, countless student initiatives at universities across the country, and successful efforts to divest at the state and local level. That time, the American people, nothing short of peace for the victims and justice for the criminals would suffice. This was the organic compassion embedded in the American ethos, bursting forth to aid our brothers and sisters in distress a world away. Now, the previous administration fell short of ending the ongoing genocide. The Obama administration's new policy would actually provide a package of incentives to offer the perpetrators of genocide to the indicted war criminal Omar al-Bashir incentives. In effect, the policy is to allow the genocidal regime in Khartoum to trade away some political and territorial concessions in exchange for measures such as diplomatic recognition and the easing of sanctions, which flaunt the fundamental principles of justice and accountability. I strongly oppose any approach towards Sudan that gives incentives and rewards to a genocidal regime headed by the Sudanese president, who is an indicted war criminal himself. Such a policy is engagement to the extreme and blind to fundamental principles of justice. This new policy sends the wrong messages to tyrants around the world that they will not be brought to justice, and instead may even receive American concessions for merely rolling back the intensity of their brutality. Our government is trying to apply nuance to genocide, an approach that would be comical were it not so reprehensible. We cannot trade justice for peace. The ends do not justify the means. I look forward to hearing from the witness today, General Gration, of your thoughts on this, but I cannot believe we would offer incentives to a genocidal regime that's headed by an indicted war criminal. I thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this unusual honor to serve with you on this panel.
Well, let me thank you very much, and once again express my appreciation for the many years that you have worked on this issue. Codell, I traveled, that you led a decade ago or more, and so your record is very clear, and I appreciate you taking the time to come here. Thank you. Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for your leadership for holding this hearing and I want to associate myself with Senator Brownback's remarks with regard to your leadership in being really the lone voice for many years in terms of declaring genocide as taking place in Sudan. We all know that that is the case, and we appreciate your leadership and for bringing us together really in a bipartisan way. I see Congressman Wolf in the audience. I visited Sudan the first time, been 3 times with Mr. Royce of California, and I think that all of us have concluded that this is an issue of humanitarian concerns. It's one of national security. It's an issue that should not be happening on our watch. Genocide should not be happening in this century. I'm pleased to see General Gration. We've talked before about the new policy, and I'm anxious to hear what has developed in moving forward on this, because I think we all are anxious to see some concrete results. The people of Sudan deserve no less. I also have to commend the young people in our faith community for continuing with the simple message of Save Darfur. They've really, truly been the wind beneath our wings here in Congress to bring this bipartisan consensus on divestment, on genocide, and all of the actions that we've taken here. But we all know, as time and history have shown us, that the regime in Khartoum can be very creative in its obstinacy and in complying with international law and human rights, even as it continues to perpetrate further crimes and injustices. Sudan and its people have gone through a heck of a lot over the years. Too many deaths, too many people have been forced from their homes, too many families have been destroyed, too many women have been raped, too many children have been killed. And we have a moral responsibility to help the people of Sudan, the people of Darfur, achieve a peaceful and a stable future. So I hope that this new policy will produce a better set of results than what we've seen before, but I also know that we must retain our ability to impose harsher sanctions if this new direction does not bear fruit. Thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Mr. Royce, who for many years was the chair of the Subcommittee on Africa and has been a member of the committee for decades and has also worked very diligently in the whole question of Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd say it's good to have General Gration before the committee. As the General well knows, we have a difference of opinion and have had for some time with respect to how we move forward with Khartoum. And I've been watching these war criminals for quite some time. At one point in time, General Gration, you and I had an opportunity in Darfur to see some of this firsthand. And I just wanted to thank John Pendergast, who's with us today, who helped guide us into Darfur, Sudan, on that trip. And along with Don Cheadle, I chaired the delegation. We brought a Nightline camera crew who, you'll remember, John, documented the atrocities that were committed not just by the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed is the militia used by the Sudanese government. They also documented the atrocities committed by the Sudanese government itself. And this gets to the point that I want to make. And I also want to thank some of the other members who traveled with us, Barbara, on that trip, as Congresswoman Lee did. But I wanted to make several observations here. One is, thanks to the good work of Don Payne, and I chaired the committee when we put the genocide resolution through, we have a number of people, I think, that were involved in a principal way in putting this country on record in terms of where we would stand on the issue of genocide. And we have the first eyewitness, we have the eyewitness accounts ourselves as to what was happening. And I can share with you the testimony of one young boy who was missing his hand. And when asked what happened to it, he said, Janjaweed. And the pictures that he and others had sketched out of the attacks that had occurred on his village were attacks not just by Janjaweed, but also by Antonov planes operated by the Sudanese government that had dropped bombs on his city. We went into Tinea, which had been bombed by the Sudanese government. We saw sketches of the half-tracks and military vehicles and Sudanese army troops that did the follow-up work to the Janjaweed when the Janjaweed was first sent in to commit the atrocities, and then the army, the Sudanese army, came in afterwards. These are the reasons why Bashir is a war criminal, why he has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. But this is only the beginning. You know, the discussion in terms of what his militia, which is being, frankly, worked up in southern Sudan to again begin this process, these are the war crimes of a head of state who to this day won't allow many of the NGOs back into Sudan in order to assist in trying to bring some level of humanity and sustenance to the victims of this. But think for a minute what it means when the Sudanese government assists a person like Kony, who is in the process of recruiting young children into the Lord's Resistance Army. Think about the fact that you have a militia whose purpose is simply to commit rape and mayhem across Central Africa. And then you have the surrendered commander of Kony's units who says that the Lord's Resistance Army is sponsored by Khartoum. This is something that we've known for a long time. But it is good finally to have an officer in Kony's forces come forward recently and say, no, we are in fact sponsored by Khartoum, and testified to the intention of LRA leader Joseph Kony to move along the Central African Republic border of Chad and then into Darfur to meet officers of the Sudan Armed Forces, long reputed to be the LRA sponsors. Kony told me, says the officer, that he was going to meet Fadil, the SAF officer who coordinates LRA activities. He wants them to give him logistical support and a safe haven. Well, for many years, that was the safe haven. That was the line of support for munitions, and also, we know, for those wounded soldiers who were taken up and patched back into shape. This is the regime in Khartoum that we are dealing with. You know, and I'll add one other thing. Kony urged all LRA units to make their way to Darfur and report to the first Arab military post they came across. Kony is desperate, he said. Things are very hard. We were constantly on the move. Sometimes we would not rest for a week. The Ugandans were pursuing us everywhere. Well, this, my friends, is the reality of what is happening today. And the question is, what is the world going to do to bring an end to Kony's work, to bring an end to the barbarism that occurs in the suicidal action and the genocidal acts that occur across Sudan? You know, we took a certain commitment to put an end to genocide, and frankly, I think we got a rare victory the other day when Sudanese President Bashir's planned trip to Turkey was canceled. But again, at the end of the day, we've got to ask ourselves the same question that we'll hear in the testimony. The former coordinator of the UN panel of experts on Sudan will testify this morning, quote, in contrast to that leadership of 2004 and 2005, the United States appears to have now joined the group of influential states who sit by quietly and do nothing to ensure that sanctions work to protect Darfurians. I want to hear today why that is not the case. I think that's dead on, and I think that has to change. And it's going to take more than just John Pendergast working 24/7 to make it change. It's going to take members of this committee committing themselves to getting back on offense and bringing and seeing justice done for the victims in Darfur. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not been as involved in the issue of Sudan and Darfur in particular as other members of the committee. I did, with Ms. Lee, visit Darfur and the southern Sudan and Khartoum on a congressional delegation led by Majority Leader Hoyer in April of 2007. But I am very troubled that we have not kept a promise that humanity made before I was born, but that I feel bound by, never again. The promise was not never again in the Western world or never again in the developed world. It was never again. We could not put an end to all evil, but genocide was different. And humanity everywhere would act together to prevent genocide anywhere. There may be some problems of definition. There may be, where does an atrocity leave off and genocide begin? But it's very clear that there have been genocides since the Holocaust, in Cambodia, in Rwanda, and now in Darfur. So we have not kept the promise of never again to allow genocide. We've learned bitter lessons about how hard it is to shape events in various places in the world. We certainly can all criticize our government's failures to put an end to it, but the truth is that the world, all of humanity, has not acted in the way that we promised more than 60 years ago. I'm pleased by the Obama administration's new emphasis on ending the genocide in Darfur, ending the violence, ending the atrocities, implementing the comprehensive peace agreement that ended the brutal, deadly civil war in southern Sudan. I welcome Ambassador Rice's comment that the strategy would be smart, tough, and balanced, but the policy needs to be tough, smart, and balanced in pursuit of a goal of ending genocide and ending the atrocities in the Sudan generally. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Woolsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a direct result of our chairman's responsible insistence that the Darfur genocide be identified before rather than after all these atrocities become history, the people in my district, I'm from Petaluma, California, started an effort called Dear Darfur, Love Petaluma. That effort has become an entire Bay Area effort. And they followed up after knowing that we stepped up to the plate and knew that genocide was occurring and we weren't turning our heads and knew that they had to do something about it. I'm so happy that I represent such great people and work with such great people. And they know, as well as we know, we're at a very important point in Sudan's future right now. Their history is going to be written as we are members of Congress, and we have such an important role to play. And I'm truly concerned that so much attention is being placed on the logistics for the elections, which are very important, but these elections must have concern for the political environment in which they take place, and that's where I'm unclear, because under the CPA, the government is supposed to revise laws governing freedom for the press, freedom for the assembly, and laws to limit the power of national security services. Well, I'm hoping today that I'm going to hear some information from you on if it's going to happen, if not, what we must do to ensure that we don't have elections that just are meaningless, because, as I said, the history for Sudan and for the Sudanese people is being written right here before us. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Congressman Wolf, if he would like to come up and be a part of the panel. As you know, Congressman Wolf has probably had the longest history of working on this issue of anyone in the Congress, even preceding my time. But he has said no. But I would certainly keep the offer open if there's any question you'd like to ask. You're certainly welcome. And let me acknowledge also Ted Danye, who has worked on this issue with Noel Lassane, my chief of staff. But Mr. Danye has been involved with the issue for quite some time and recently traveled to Juba with me 2 months ago, 1 month ago. It was 2 weeks ago. Time flies. And we had some very, very Well, let's turn to our principal witness on this first panel. We have Major General Scott Gration, U.S. Army Air Force, retired. Major General Scott Gration currently serves as the President's Special Envoy to Sudan. He spent his childhood years in the now Democratic Republic of Congo and in Kenya. General Gration graduated from Rutgers University in New Jersey with a BS in mechanical engineering before joining the United States Air Force, where he served from 1974 to 2006. During his time in the Air Force, General Gration served a 2-year assignment with the Kenyan Air Force as an instructor. His staff positions included tours in the Pentagon and NATO, and a White House fellowship. He was Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs. General Gration was a national security advisor to the Obama presidential campaign and served as a special assistant to the president. General Gration speaks Swahili. He has a MA from Georgetown University in National Security Studies and is very committed to this issue at this time. Let me turn the floor over to our special envoy.
Thank you very much. Chairman Payne, members of the House Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health, and distinguished guests, thank you very much for this opportunity to provide an update on the administration's efforts in Sudan. But before I begin, let me add my heartfelt condolences to those who have been expressed by Chairman Payne this morning, to those who have suffered such a significant loss in the Mogadishu suicide attack. This event causes us all to think about how we must redouble our efforts to bring peace in all of Africa. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start by expressing my deep appreciation for your long-standing commitment to resolving the challenges associated with Sudan. We know that you traveled recently to the region, and we're thankful for your dedicated efforts to improve the lives of the Sudanese people, to find lasting solutions to promote peace. We note that your commitment is widely shared by members of this committee, and we are also extremely grateful to each member for the deep interest in our efforts and for your continued support. As you know, the Secretary of State, Ambassador Rice, and I presented the President's strategy on Sudan in October. This strategy uses an integrated and comprehensive approach and is focused on 3 major objectives. The first goal is to definitively end the conflict in Darfur, the gross human rights abuses, the genocide. The second is to implement the North-South Comprehensive Peace Agreement in a manner that results in a peaceful post-2011 Sudan, a united Sudan, or 2 separate and viable states at peace with each other, at peace with their neighbors. The third objective is to ensure that Sudan does not again become a safe haven for international terrorists. I'll spend the next few minutes reviewing some of my recent activities and explaining how the administration's actions are helping to meet the goals outlined in the Sudan strategy. I'll focus first on our efforts related to Darfur. In my travels to the Darfur region over the past 5 years, I've witnessed firsthand the devastation and destruction that conflict has inflicted on the people of Darfur, particularly on the women and children. In keeping with the first objective of our strategy, the administration remains committed to saving lives, to fostering meaningful and lasting reconciliation, to ensuring a durable peace for all the people of Darfur. We continue to support the Doha peace process as the AU-UN mediator Jibril Basoli seeks to negotiate an agreement that fully addresses the concerns of the Darfuri people. To give these negotiations the best possible chance of success, we've been working to unite the fragmented armed movements in Darfur so they can speak at a negotiating table with one voice. As a result of our efforts, 8 rebel factions have formed a coalition and are committed to even a wider unification. In addition, we will continue to support and strengthen UNAMID. We'll work with them and the government of Sudan to improve local security conditions throughout Darfur, and will strive to reduce tensions along Sudan's western border with Chad. Finally, we're working with USAID and operational NGOs to improve the humanitarian situation in Darfur, to improve NGO access to populations in need. In my travels, I've observed that while significant effort has been made to fill the gaps, to minimize the sufferings caused by the expulsion of the 13 NGOs in March 2009, humanitarian agencies have only limited access to areas outside the major towns because of the continued widespread insecurity. We're working closely with the United Nations, African Union, and Sudanese authorities to improve local security, to advance the rule of law, to help build a better life, a better future for the Darfuri people. In keeping with the second objective of our strategy, we're working to fully implement the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. To that end, we're deeply engaged with the National Congress Party and with the Sudan People's Liberation Movement to resolve the remaining CPA challenges, to fully implement the agreements reached between the two parties. I believe our involvement in this process has been crucial to helping the parties negotiate agreements on elections, on referenda for self-determination. Our involvement will also be critical in helping prepare for the post-CPA period. Issues such as citizenship, north-south border demarcation, resource sharing must be resolved soon to facilitate a long-term stability along the border and in the region. We're also focused on ensuring that the April 2010 elections are credible, that they further political transformation and the peace process. Voter registration will conclude next week, but far more work needs to be done in coordination with the Sudanese authorities and with our international partners to ensure that the will of the Sudanese citizens is clearly expressed and fully implemented. We continue to be deeply concerned about the increase in interethnic violence in the South and its devastating effect on local communities. We must all increase our efforts to mitigate these threats to security and stability, to create an environment for a peaceful referenda, for a transition to the post-2011 period. In keeping with the third objective in our strategy, the United States continues to work with the Sudanese authorities and international community to keep non-state actors who might threaten our interests and terrorist organizations from developing a foothold in Sudan. We will ensure that U.S. efforts in Sudan enhance our capacity to protect American lives and American interests around the globe. Finally, as part of our U.S. strategy on Sudan, senior officials from the interagency will meet in early 2010 for the first in a series of quarterly interagency reviews designed to assess conditions on the ground, to determine whether progress or backsliding has occurred, to agree on whether incentives or pressures are warranted. The United States has a clear obligation and an interest to lead the international efforts for peace in Sudan. Failure to accomplish our objectives in Darfur, between the North and the South, and on the counterterrorism front could result in more suffering for the Sudanese people, further regional instability, and possible safe havens for international terrorists. We just can't afford to fail. Together, the United States and its partners are committed to creating an environment in which the parties themselves can bring peace to Sudan. We have no option but to succeed. And working together with all the parties, with our international partners, I believe we can succeed. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, distinguished guests, thank you again for your leadership and for your support. I look forward to answering your question about the critical challenges that we all face in Sudan. Thank you.
Well, let me thank you very much, General Gration. Like I said, I appreciate the hard work that you're putting into this effort, and we appreciate your testimony. Let me begin by asking a couple of questions. First of all, the administration's long-awaited Sudan policy, if fully implemented, provides a framework to achieve a stable democracy and a lasting peace in Sudan. At the center of this strategy is a policy of engagement with necessary benchmarks and credible pressure to ensure accountability. However, implementation of the strategy will be critical in moving forward. So my question basically is, what are the specific indicators of progress being used in the U.S. policy? And what are the precise criteria to be used for evaluating them? We've heard that there are incentives and also disincentives, and so we really would like to know the way that there will be a criteria for the evaluation of them, since this is the center of the strategy.
Yes, you put your finger on it, in that implementation is the key. Agreements without implementation are really no good. And so this policy seeks to ensure that agreements made between parties are implemented fully. We started with the CPA. When I took on this job, we had 12 areas where we had differences of agreements between the parties. We've been able to close on 10 of those 12. The remaining one is the census, and therefore the election, and then the referendum. And we seek to get an agreement on those two. When we get agreements, we will turn those agreements into benchmarks. In other words, we have gone through all the decisions and all the agreements that we've been able to make, and they're codified in the CPA, and that we'll continue to make in Darfur discussions that will come out of the Doha process, and we'll turn these into objective statements. Who's doing it, what they're doing, when it needs to be done by, and what are the performance standards. We've done that already with the CPA. It's in the form of a stoplight chart, but we're taking it to the next level. In other words, when suspenses are missed, these are identified on a weekly basis to both parties and to interested parties on the outside. We will continue to do this, but let me just explain that this strategy will not succeed unless we have those benchmarks and we are able to objectively track them with changes of behavior and changes of condition on the ground. And that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to ensure that through the UN and through other mechanisms that we're able to see verifiable, unreversible changes on the ground. We have a philosophy that's a little bit different than the Cold War, when it was trust and verify. Ours is verify then trust. We will take a look on the ground, we'll verify the changes in behavior, verify the changes in condition, and then based on that, we will make a determination whether more pressures need to be applied or whether incentives need to be applied to encourage more of that kind of behavior, if it's positive. And so that's what the policy does. It takes all the agreements, turns them into objective statements. It looks for measures and monitoring ways that we can verify the changes on the ground, whether positive or negative, or even just standing still. And then we will work through the interagency process to ensure that senior leaders can make the determine whether we need to put pressures or incentives. And this will be done, obviously, as we do everything, in consultation with Congress.
All right, my time has expired. Let me just ask one quick question. Is there any plan for the IDPs in Darfur and in Chad? Is the government discussing any plan of return? Because I've heard a lot of things but no one's ever talked about when will we start to have people return home.
We have heard discussions about planning for return, but our position is, and it's a position that we've worked in conjunction with IOM, with UN agencies that are in the field, that are working on a day-to-day basis with the 2.7 million people in IDP camps. We will only support a return when it is voluntary, when the conditions in the places that they want to return to, whether it be their homes or whether it be another location, that the conditions are stable and secure and safe enough for them to return in a sustainable way. We also want to make sure that it is done with their human rights protected and with dignity. And we also want to make sure that it's done in a compassionate way. As many people have to return to places where they lost their families, where they lost their crops, where they lost their cattle, where they had their houses burned down, there's going to be an emotional element, a psychological element that we have to consider. We want to make sure that as they go back, that they can do it voluntarily and in conditions that will be sustainable and conditions that will allow them to live a life that is significantly better than they're living today.
Thank you very much. This time we will ask Senator Brown back to questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for this extraordinary privilege to be here with you on this panel. General Gration, thank you for joining us, and it's a tough job that you have. But I am terribly troubled by this situation. President Bashir, well, I guess I should ask you, he has participated in a genocide in Sudan, is that correct?
Yes, sir. He was the president of the country during the time that genocide took place, and therefore he would have participated.
And so he has led the genocide in Darfur.
His government was responsible for that, and he was the leader of the government, therefore he would have led it.
And President Bashir is an indicted war criminal by the ICC?
He is.
Has the United States government been negotiating, dealing, or otherwise associating with any individual from Sudan who has been directly implicated in committing genocides or crimes against humanity?
Do I understand that? You're asking, are we dealing with people that have been involved in the genocide or crimes against humanity?
So we've been negotiating, dealing, or otherwise associating with any individual from Sudan who has been directly implicated in committing genocide or crimes against humanity.
I have never met with President Bashir, and we don't have plans to meet with President Bashir. There are people that we negotiate with that are part of the NCP, that are part of that government. That is the only way that we've been able to reach agreements on the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. It's the only way we've been able to reach agreements on humanitarian assistance in Darfur. It's the only way we've been able to reach agreements on the Chad-Sudan border conflict, agreements in Doha, and we're going to have to continue to have engagement, not for engagement's sake, but to save lives and to move the ball forward in Sudan.
Have any of those individuals been involved directly or indirectly in committing genocides or crimes against humanity?
I don't know that directly. I understand that some of the people were in the government at the time, especially between 2003 and 2005, but I have no direct knowledge of their direct involvement in it.
They're in the leadership in the government in Sudan? The individuals you're negotiating with or dealing with?
I'm negotiating with individuals that are in high-level positions in the government of Sudan.
You are dealing with a government that is conducting an ongoing genocide, is that correct?
I'm dealing with the government.
That is conducting an ongoing genocide in Sudan?
I'm dealing with the government, and in an effort to end the conflict, in an effort to end gross human rights abuses.
I understand the objective. I'm asking you, are you dealing with a government that is conducting an ongoing genocide in Sudan?
I'm dealing with, as I said, I'm dealing with the government in Khartoum of Sudan.
Which is currently conducting a genocide in Sudan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Should we have dealt with Charles Taylor? He was an indicted war criminal.
I've not been involved with Charles Taylor.
Should we have negotiated with Serbian leader Karadzic, butcher of Bosnia?
I've not been involved in that situation.
Let me get to the specifics then in this, and this will be my last question. I think it is obvious what's taking place. Despite U.S. efforts to broker a settlement on key outstanding issues regarding CPA implementation, the process appears deadlocked due in no small part to the National Congress Party's obstructionism. At what point would the United States follow through on its promises to increase pressure on the NCP to make the necessary concessions to pass the Southern Sudan referendum law, reform the national security law, fully implement the Permanent Court of Arbitration's decision on ABA, and fully implement other elements of the CPA?
I have been involved in discussions and negotiations with the parties, and it is very clear that they both have positions that they're maintaining to, both in the South and in the North, and we've been helping both sides come to a compromise on those issues so that they can get a solution on the elections, they can get a solution on the referendum, they can get a solution on popular consultations, and on the ABA issue, and in addition to the national security law. I anticipate that these will be resolved in the near future so we can move on and start working on the post-CPA issues of citizenship, of the north-south border, and of resource sharing, things like grazing rights, water rights, and oil.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Ms. Lee.
Thank you very much. General Gration, I'm somewhat encouraged by your new policy that places a special emphasis on international cooperation and multilateral action involving in solving Sudan's pressing humanitarian and political issues. However, as it relates to genocide, I think those are the issues that are paramount and foremost in all of our minds. And we know that China, and I think we've talked a little bit about this in terms of China being one of the key players in that regard, at least in Sudan, and the leverage that China holds. Given that China, it holds unparalleled, really economic and political leverage over the government of Sudan, I took the opportunity to write to President Obama in advance of his recent trip to China, encouraging him to secure the Chinese government's full support and assistance in accomplishing the goals of this new Sudan policy. I haven't heard any reports, however, that indicated whether or not the issue was discussed on the president's visit. Can you tell me whether or not and to what extent the United States has reached out to China for support in terms of our policy in Sudan, and also in support of helping us in the genocide in Sudan? Also, the League of Arab States in seeking their support in not only implementing the new policy, but also ending the genocide. I've had the opportunity, like many members here, to meet with President Mubarak. We met with the President of Algeria and other leaders, and raised this concern in terms of them taking a hard stand against what is taking place in the Sudan. So far, we've seen some results only in the humanitarian needs. You know, I know that Egypt is helping in a tremendous way with the hospital and clinics and what have you, but I haven't seen the kind of response by China or any of the League of Arab States saying, look, this genocide must end, or else we're going to also impose sanctions and do some other things that may make it even more difficult for them to continue, for the Sudanese to continue with their disastrous, efforts in killing people and in committing genocide.
Right. As you know, the centerpiece, or one of the pieces of the strategy, is the multilateral commitment and working with our international partners to achieve our collective goals in Sudan. And we've set up many different mechanisms to allow us to do that more efficiently. The first is what we call the Envoy 6. It's the P5 countries that have special envoys, and in addition to the European Union, who has a special envoy. We started meeting together. We said we were going to meet every 6 months. We're now meeting about every 2 months. It's probably going to go down to every 1 month. As part of that group, Russia and China, along with France, the UK, United States, and the EU, we get together. In terms of China specifically, Ambassador Liu Guojing is their representative or their envoy on Sudan issues. We go back to the time when I was flying with the Kenya Air Force, and he was assigned to the embassy in Kenya. We have had a relationship that allows us to have frank and open conversations on issues. The interesting thing is that China and the United States share the same objectives when it comes to security, when it comes to stability. They need security and stability to protect their investment of $4.5 billion in the oil industry. We need the security and stability to protect the Sudanese people and the future of Sudan. And so we've been able to work together in ways to help promote stability and security. We've been able to work together on humanitarian projects to synchronize these better, so that we don't build two roads next to each other 100 miles, but we put those end to end.
General Gration, let me just ask you before my time is up, though. Have you communicated to the Chinese government the fact that this cooperation that you're listing is wonderful? It should go. But if the carnage doesn't stop, if the genocide doesn't stop, have you communicated to the Chinese government that they should join us in imposing sanctions and take a hard line against what is taking place as a next step?
We have indeed. And the President did bring it up with President Hu. They discussed Sudan. They discussed areas of cooperation. I don't have all the details, but I do know that it was a centerpiece of the discussions in Beijing. I have also traveled to Beijing to have discussions with the people over there, and we've made these points very clear. And while there is significant areas of strategic cooperation, there are areas where we differ on the tactical level, on arms and those kinds of things. And we're continuing to work through those issues. But as you know, these are bilateral issues, and we'll continue to influence them as we can. But I will tell you that the spirit of cooperation is significant. And we're doing the same thing with periphery states and Arab states. In addition to the Troika and the contact group, we have frequent meetings with the Arab League, with Tripoli, Libya, with Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, IGAD countries. I'm leaving possibly tomorrow to attend the ministerials with the IGAD countries. I will be going to Egypt and to Libya before Christmas holiday. These things we will continue to do because, like you, we know that this solution is not one that involves just America. It is one that involves the international community and the broad international community. Everybody has to be part of the solution to end the conflict and to promote peace and development.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, Ranking Member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for convening this very important hearing. I just want the record to know the only reason I was late because Sudan is one of the highest priorities for me. The head of the Central Authority for Brazil, which is the agency or entity that adjudicates cases of Hague cases where children have been abducted, was in town. Yesterday we had a hearing on that, chaired very ably by Mr. Wolf on the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and I've been working on that issue with David Goldman, a man we both know very well from New Jersey, whose son, Sean, was kidnapped 5 years ago, over 5 years ago, and we are coming hopefully to a positive conclusion soon. But this is the person who is in charge of that government entity that adjudicates those cases. So
what was a half-hour meeting turned into an hour and a half. So I do apologize, General, for not being here for your opening, but it in no way reflects my deep and abiding concern about Sudan. Having been to Mukjar and Kama Camp myself, having met with Bashir for the better part, almost 2 hours, in a very real argument with that man. This is before he was indicted for war crimes. You know, Sudan is at the top of my list, as it is the chairman's, in trying to bring some peace and reconciliation and justice. Just for, as you may know, General, as ranking member, I have asked no less than 4 times for a classified briefing about the annex of the menu of incentives and disincentives that were announced as part of the new strategy on October 19th. We asked on October 21st, 22nd, 29th, and November 4th, and again on the 30th, so that'll be 5 times, to have a classified briefing to weigh what it is that this new policy really entails. As the Secretary of State pointed out, this is classified. But it seems to me the fact that the ranking member still can't get this information, I don't think our distinguished chairman has gotten it either, is very, very troubling, because, you know, like Mr. Brownback, like Mr. Wolf, like my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, this is not a passing concern. This is a deep and this is a passionate concern for each of us. And we want to know what the strategy is, and in closed session or in a classified briefing here or downtown, we'll do it anywhere, anytime. So I reiterate that request. I really want to hear what is being contemplated here. So please honor that request as soon as possible. Today, tomorrow, any day. Just name the day. I'll be there, and my colleagues will be there as well. Likewise, we made multiple requests for detailed briefings on the reported arms transfers from the regime in Khartoum to militias in southern Sudan. We held a hearing that Mr. Payne will remember so well, where we heard from very troubling numbers of AK-47s and other weapons that are being deployed south, and raising the specter of perhaps renewed hostilities that we need to get a better handle on, at least as policymakers. You may know it. We don't know the numbers. So I reiterate that request as well. Finally, let me just say, and I would ask unanimous consent that my statement be made a part of the record. I don't think it would be appropriate to go back and go through that now.
Without objection.
But I would join with my colleague, Ms. Lee, in, you know, I was a signer of the letter that went down to the president before his trip to Beijing, and we have had hearings in this room time and again about, remember we were calling the Genocide Olympics, and in a run-up that there was leverage that was not used with regards to China's singular role in the genocide first in southern Sudan, where 2 million people were butchered and killed, and the upwards of 450,000, whatever the current number of atrocity is, of dead in Darfur. And to the best of my knowledge, we saw nothing about that information being conveyed to Hu Jintao or anyone else during that Beijing. And maybe you can tell us and elaborate on whether or not the president raised it. It seems to me that the arms supplier that makes it all possible to wage genocide, if you want to stop it, you go to the source. It's not just in Khartoum where all of this is emanating. It's being aided and abetted by the Chinese government. And we've raised this, Mr. Payne and I, over and over again in every forum we could possibly think of, and especially with the Chinese. Mr. Wolf and I were in Beijing right before the Olympics, and that was a major part of our dialogue with our Chinese interlocutors. But if it's not backed up by the President of the United States, it seems to me our thoughts ring a bit hollow. And I would add, on human rights in general, and I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican in the White House, human rights transcend all party. They have no party. When you're being victimized, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican in terms of who's advocating or not. We had a hearing right before the president left about the horrific one-child-per-couple policy, and we had a lawyer, Jiang, who bravely testified at that hearing and another hearing about due process rights and about this crime against women called forced abortion, we asked the president on that case as well to raise the issue and to provide protection for the lawyers, the human rights defenders like Jiang, who were arrested, were interrogated. We believe that he's now, he's under very, very tight surveillance. But it's part of a seamless lack of intervention. What happened on Darfur? Did the president raise the issue? And I mean robustly. Hopefully he did it in some way. Hopefully he did it in a very profound way. Because China can turn off the spigot of funds and monies that is enabling this terrible killing fields.
Thank you. In terms of the classified briefing, I'm available anytime to do that. And I don't know of the, quote, annex, but I do know that there are working papers that we used as we deliberated, as we came up with a menu of things that we could consider in tiers of options on the political, economic, military side, and I'd be happy to share those with you. But
well, I mentioned the annex, if I could interrupt.
But there is no annex.
Well, the Secretary of State had said that.
Okay.
He said they are part, in fact, of a classified annex to our strategy, and we are announcing the outline of today. So,
well, I'm telling you that I've never seen one. The only thing I've seen is the classified working papers that are part of the NSC, and but I'd be happy to tell you anything that's in those documents. That is no problem at all.
On the China?
On the China, I was not with the president on this trip. All I know is that the issue was raised, that the two presidents had in-depth discussions on Sudan and on the issues surrounding Sudan. I don't know specifically about what was raised in terms of demarches and that kind of thing, but I can try to find out.
Well, with respect, in asking the indulgence of the chairman, I read the joint statements that were made by President Obama and Hu Jintao after they made them. Read them very carefully, and my concern is that where was Darfur? Where was human rights in general, other than an oblique mention buried in the body of the text? If you could get back with specifics about what was raised, in what manner, that would be very, very helpful, because private diplomacy can only go so far when there's a genocide occurring. I hope he did mention it, but I hope he mentioned it in a way that was really significant.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miller?
Thank you. General, it should not be a great surprise that there are continuing disagreements about the preparations for the national election in April, about polling procedures, voter registration, but more broadly about whether they're going to be real elections. Do you think the 2010 elections are going to take place? Do you think that they are going to be credible, that they're going to be free, fair, and transparent? What are we doing to make sure that happens? What are we doing to prepare for the very distinctly possible outcome of elections that are not credible, that are a fraud, that are a sham? What are we doing to make sure that those are not treated as legitimizing a genocidal government?
Yes, we believe that the spirit of the CPA, the letter of the CPA, tells us and gives us our mandate to have elections in Sudan. This is part of the political transformation that we're seeking, that the CPA sought. The first step was to get an election law that allowed us to proceed. We've been able to do the registration piece, and as you probably know, we're up to 60%, 7.4 million people overall in the north. In Darfur, just under 50%, with 1.79 million people registered. And in the south, we've achieved 60% with 2.5 million people registered. That allows these Sudanese the option of expressing their will in the election, and I think that's very important. We've seen that while there have been irregularities and while there have been things that we don't like, we have seen that the government has been responsive in trying to help the situation get better. In the very beginning, there was only 1,500 people. There were registrars. There weren't enough books. When the international community pointed that out, they increased the number of registrars, increased the number of books to help more people get registered. And while it's not perfect, we have to remember that this is the first time in 24 years that they've had elections. We also have to remember that in the last election, only 5 million people were registered as opposed to the numbers that we have already. 11.96 people registered already for this election. So yes, I think that there is an opportunity for us to work on political transformation through this election. There's a lot of things that have to continue, though. We have to get sorted out the census so we can get an agreement between the two parties about the legislature, because it's only by having the elections down to the legislative level that we can, number one, have a legislature that has been elected by the people as to one that's been appointed. Number two, we have to make sure that all the other pieces that go into an election to help make it free and fair, that we help with instituting these processes. So it's not only the law, it's not only this registration piece, but it's voter education. It's making sure that there's security. It's making sure that there's all the administrative pieces of printing the ballots and getting them to the right places at the right time. And then there's the whole piece about tabulation and in a way that's clear. And so what we want to do is work with the international community to have monitors at the right place. And the Carter Center's increased its people from 12 to 30 already for the registration, and we're working together with the international community to bring in more. We're also working with the National Election Commission to ensure that they are bringing in their monitors and that this system is as free and as fair, as credible as we can get it. Why? Because it's part of the transformation process. But number two, we will start next year in July to start registering people, I should say we, but the Sudanese will, in the South and in Abyei for the referendum. In the South for self-determination, and in Abyei to decide whether they stay with the North or go with the South if the South chooses independence. Many of these same procedures in terms of the law, in terms of the preparation, in terms of free, fair, and credible, in terms of counting and security, are the same things that we're going through the processes now for. We're going to have to go through it again. And the worst thing that I can think of is at the end in January 2011, we say to the people of Southern Sudan, this referenda wasn't free, it wasn't fair, it wasn't credible, therefore it's invalidated. We need to do everything we can now and then to ensure the people of Sudan not only get to elect their leaders, not only get to elect their legislators, but the people in the South have an opportunity to express their will in a way that's free, fair, and credible. We're working that process. This is a process, and if you take a look at each of the post-conflict countries, as they've tried to do elections, this has been tough. And when you don't have a history of legislative process, election process, as Sudan doesn't, in that we've had a break since 1986 until now, and we've had all the conflict, and we're just coming together. This is a tough process, but I got to tell you, the United States and the international community is committed to doing everything they can to ensure that the process will result in a situation where individuals can express their will and that their will is fully counted and implemented.
Thank you very much. We have a vote coming up. We have 3 members who have not asked questions. We'll give each of them 4 minutes. It'll take 12 minutes. That'll give us plenty of time to get over to this 15-minute vote. So at this time, Dr. Boseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Grattan, what benchmarks is the administration using to measure the success of the new Sudan strategy? What are the incentives and disincentives? If you can't divulge them now, will you allow Congress access to the classified annex of the policy review?
Yes, is I'm happy to come over here anytime at a time that's convenient for you all to discuss the working papers and the policy deliberations that we went through, recognizing that this is just a menu of options that are available to decision makers as we take a look at what we can do to pressure and what we can do to incentivize actions on the ground. As I've explained earlier, we are looking at conditions changing on the ground. We're trying to do this in an objective way, and we'll continue to work through this process so we have objective benchmarks that we can present. The first meeting that we have planned is going to be shortly after the new year, where we'll be able to present these conditions on the ground that it will be up to policymakers in the executive branch, and we will also do this with consultations with Congress to make sure that we either increase pressures in those areas where there's been backsliding or no progress, and incentivize in those areas
You
where we've
mentioned,
made progress.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we just got a second. You mentioned progress, and I guess what I'd like to know is what specific progress that we have to show for that the engagement policy is working. The situation on the ground in Darfur has not substantially changed since the administration took office. Insecurity in the south is rising, and there's no sign of an imminent peace deal. What has the NCP given us?
I would take issue with all those. I think we have made a lot of changes. We've been able, when I took over, there was 1.2 million people that faced a crisis because of 13 NGOs being thrown out. We've been able to fix that. We made it through the rainy season without having those losses. We've been having significant movement in terms of armed group unification. The Chad-Sudan border issue has gone from where we had rebel groups in Jamina, proxy people in Omdurman. We are now in a situation where Dr. Razi is going over to Jamina, and we're expecting the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Faki, to come to Sudan. These are significant changes. If you just take a look at the numbers in June of this last year, and I recognize that they're low, there was 16 excess deaths. None of them were Fur people. It was on Arab, plus 2 policemen and 2 others. My point is that things are changing significantly. Things are improving, but there's still a lawful long ways to go. We have 2.7 million people living in abhorrent conditions. We have insecurity. We have gender-based violence. This has to change, but we are making progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Woolsey?
Thank you. General Gration, when the Sudanese government unilaterally kicked the humanitarian NGOs out of the country, the situation disintegrated rapidly for the people in need. The situation was already dire for women and children. So what is the situation now regarding women and children, regarding health, regarding delivery of emergency food sources?
By working with the UN, existing NGOs, and by the Sudanese government allowing 4 major new NGOs to return to Darfur, we have actually gotten up to the capacity we had before. That said, we're doing it with emergency conditions. We're doing it with stopgap measures. It's not sustainable. We're working on fixing that. You're exactly correct in that there were gaps before the NGOs were pushed out. There are still those gaps. There are certain areas where we have not gotten up to speed, and these include the protection aspects and some of the aspects that you've talked about, where we're really taking care of the women and the children. But in terms of health, in terms of food, water, and sanitation, we're meeting the basic needs, but you're exactly right. We need to push a lot harder to work on protection and some of these other issues.
Well, will that push depend upon the free, fair, credible elections, or can it happen?
It's happening right now, ma'am. We're working on an ongoing basis to try to fix this problem. And I would say it's unrelated to the election.
So regarding the election, I guess this is more of a rhetorical question. What if it doesn't turn out to be fair, free, and credible? Where will the United States draw the line, or will we compromise, thinking we've put in all the efforts that we possibly could, did the best we could and tried but failed? I mean, will we accept a criminal government?
We are now working with our international partners on these very same issues, the envoys, the contact group, but we're discussing what is going to be our approach, because we're going to have to be doing a lot of the funding. And the question is when do you stop funding something that's not going to be working out? We are committed, though, to doing everything we can to ensure we put in these processes. And ma'am, it may not only be for this election, but it may be for subsequent elections. And so what we're trying to do is put into place processes and procedures and a way of doing things now so people understand that they can vote, that they can make a change, that they can express their will through democratic means. And this political transformation is going to be a process. And it may not be something we can do between now and April, but it's certainly something that we have to try to do, and then it's something that we have to continue to build on through the referendum and through subsequent elections.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to quickly make the observation here that when you have a manufactured crisis and you run, as Bashir did, you run all the aid groups out, and then you let a handful or 5 of them back in with a set of new conditions, as the group enough say, what to do about Sudan now. They say clearly they don't have access to large areas of Darfur anymore, and those that do have access to vulnerable populations no longer publicize their assessments for fear of expulsion. So I just want to get that into the record in terms of the other side of this argument. I wanted to make the point and come back to the fact that the Lord's Resistance Army is on the run. We have a commander who recently surrendered. In interviews, he's noted that Joseph Kony has the intention to move his forces into Darfur to link up with the Sudan Armed Forces. He wants those armed forces to give him logistical support. In the past they have. I remember when they were patching up his soldiers in hospitals and sending them south and giving munitions to them. So the Islamist government in Sudan is really the last lifeline, as it's been the lifeline for years, but it's now the last lifeline for Kony. Let's cut this off and end Kony's terror across Africa. I just ask you, how involved today is the Sudanese government, and how do you intend to bring pressure to get that lifeline cut off?
First of all, I'd say that in terms of the NGOs moving around Darfur, I meet with them all the time. I just met with them last week in Janina and Fasher, and it's really a security issue as opposed to a restriction issue. And if we could fix the security issue, which we're working on right now, very hard to do at the local level with the Banditry, with the Janjaweed Autonomous, with the armed militia groups, if we can get these things fixed, that will solve a lot of the NGO problems. In terms of the LRA, we agree with you. There's no reason that Joseph Kony should be allowed to be wandering around and be alive and continuing the Lord's resistance. It's abhorrent. The number, I used to live in that area between Aba and Adi Faraj, and the number of people that are being raped, houses being burned down, and that kind of thing is unbelievable. And the fact that it is not an absolutely international outrage is disgusting to me. That said, I've been working with the Sudanese government in Khartoum, and I think that they would agree with you that Joseph Kony has to stop. We cannot find links, and it's been reported to me, and if you have the links that we can go in, I cannot find any links right now of the Sudanese government to Joseph Kony. And if we can find them, obviously those will be things that we will put pressures in, but there's nothing that we can find right now.
I'll just point out that his commander who surrenders says, well, they were backing us. In the past, they were backing us. So I don't know about the moment, but he's telling his troops, if you get out of the encirclement, this is who you surrender to, this is who will work with you. I just bring it up. Yep. I'm the ranking member of the Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade Subcommittee. We had a hearing 2 weeks ago in which one witness testified, and I'm going to use his words here, quote, the jihadists' aim is to thwart the international community in Darfur and reignite a holy war in southern Sudan. I would ask if you share any concerns about the reputed ambitions of Khartoum. From my standpoint, I remember pretty vividly Khartoum's backing some years ago of Osama bin Laden. So I don't give the benefit of the doubt to Bashir. So give me your assessment, Major, General, if you would, on that.
Yes, obviously we have our eyes wide open. We're looking for any indications that would lead us to believe that that's happening. Right now, though, our mandate is to save lives, to implement the CPA, to ensure that the conflict stops in Darfur, and that we reset the picture on the CT front. We are trying to do that, and if we have indications that there's a jihadist movement that is disrupting the South, obviously we're going to apply a lot of pressure and speak out very forcefully against this. This cannot be tolerated, and we won't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Thank you
General
very
Gration.
much. Our ranking member wanted 30 seconds
If I could.
to intervene.
Major Gration, General Gration, let me ask you, at our July 29th hearing, the SPLM Secretary General Pagan Amun testified that it had been documented that the NCP had supplied 79,000 AK-47s to the civilian population in the South. The next day at a Tom Lantos hearing, we heard that it was indeed 79,000 that had been distributed, but a total of 200,000 additional AK-47s had been ordered. Do those numbers comport with our assessment, and how many of those 200,000 have been distributed since the 79,000, if that number is accurate?
These are questions that I continue to ask UNMIS, UNMIS, and we are continuing to try to get our arms around this issue. There are reports of increased ammunitions. There are these reports of guns coming through. We have not found linkages to the Khartoum government at this time.
Senator, we have about 1 minute more if you'd like to make a concluding statement.
Just that I hope we can work with the administration and stop this complete loss of moral authority if we negotiate with a genocidal government. And I appreciate very much the chance here to work, but I more would appreciate the chance for the administration to reconsider what steps it is taking here. It is a massive step that I think undermines a great deal of our authority that we've had around the world on dealing with genocidal type regimes or people that conduct war crimes. I really think I would hope you would reconsider that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Well, let me thank our witness. We've been in session now in our 12th month. That's 1/2 of a congressman's term, and this has been frustrating, as you know, an issue that many of us feel very deeply about, very emotional about, and so we, first of all, appreciate your getting here. We would hope it would have been sooner than later, and that's where a lot of pent-up frustration is. You can see this is an issue that bipartisan, both houses take very seriously. I know that the President and you take it very seriously, but when you are kept in the dark, so to speak, you really don't know, and we knew you were working hard, it's just we didn't know what you were doing. Now we've gotten some light. Now we can have some evaluation. As you can see, there's still a lot of skepticism and a lot of us that want to see Sudan come into the 21st century, and we don't see it yet. But let me once again thank you for coming. We will recess this hearing. There's no time left, but we will be back. There are 4 votes. We should be back in a half hour or less. With that, I'd like to thank our special envoy for coming, and this portion of the hearing is adjourned. Recess. Thank you.